Hi, I'm Emily Shelton. This is my depth of content project for research in career and technical education. First, a little overview of my topic and thoughts on my topic. So at the beginning of the semester, I was really thrilled to receive this project as an assignment because it is so similar to what I ask my students to do on an ongoing basis. In my Project Lead the Way classes, we repeatedly follow the design process just to solve a multitude of problems. I started thinking about some problems that I could solve before I'd even chosen my research topic. Since in my mind, that's what you would do in the design process. You'd start with a problem that you have and then follow the process and research and solve the problem. So one thing that I came up with based on some experiences that I've had is timely feedback from teachers to students. And from there, I decided I could research applications in education and see if anyone had solved the problem yet, and maybe I could do something about it. So following the design process was just so enlightening to me and really opened my eyes to what my students experience in my class. And I think that if you can look at it that way, you can design better lessons for your kids. And so I'm definitely planning to reflect on the process and use those thoughts to inform my instruction this year. So part two, the need, apps for teachers and timely feedback. As I was researching, I found that there was an overabundance of apps for students, but not for teachers. I mean, just a plethora of apps that make the experience in the classroom more fun and lively for students. But a lot of time teachers have to undergo more training. It takes time and extra planning to create uses for these apps, like to integrate these apps into class. So what I thought, and what one of the articles that I read said was the future of applications, what I thought was that I could create an application for teachers that would make their job simpler. It seemed that that was a need right now in the field of applications for education. And of course, I thought about timely feedback, as I mentioned previously. I wanted to create an application to make a teacher's job simpler. And so for my application, the problem that I wanted to solve with that in that application was to help tackle the idea of timely feedback. So step three, the research. There is not a huge history on applications in education because it's not like when you traditionally think of history in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Well, applications only go back to about 1971. So the history was not hard to discover, nor was it boring. It was very intriguing to me. So applications as we know them today were first really foreshadowed in 1983 when Steve Jobs gave a speech talking about how people shouldn't have to go to a brick and mortar store to buy software, to buy programs for their computers. That they should be able to get it through some sort of digital channel because the information that they were buying is digital. But before he even made that speech, a group of three teachers had gotten together. They wanted to use computers in education. They saw the value in it, and they created what is, in my opinion, the very first application for education, which was the Oregon Trail. This was in 1971. So you may think the Oregon Trail is not an application, and it's not a mobile app as we know it today, although somebody might have made it to be. But it is, in fact, an application because an app is just any software that runs on your computer. So basically, the tools that make your computer useful. So these teachers were forward thinking, which is something I mentioned in my paper often, that we need to be forward thinking in order to make our education excellent. They were forward thinking. They saw the value of computers in education. They created the Oregon Trail. After the Oregon Trail, the next big development, in my opinion, was Microsoft Office coming onto the scene in 1988. It drastically changed the face of education. There were no more typewriters or word processors, no more correcting tape. You had spell check. It fixes grammatical and punctuation errors. Now students don't have to know how to cite sources. They can get add-ons for all sorts of things. And so it changed our standard of what students have to know as far as proper English rules and proper composition rules. And so that made me think, if that one set of applications can change history so much, what is going to happen in the future? And of course, the biggest development in apps in education was the App Store coming out in 2008. It was 1 year after the Apple iPhone was released, and from there it's just blossomed with the possibilities of applications in education. Presently, we have, just like as I said, a plethora of applications that are available for students, like Kahoot, Google Cardboard, Khan Academy. The list just goes on and on. Also, there's some outreach things that are going on in Pakistan. There's a group called UNESCO who sends texts with digital classroom content to disadvantaged pupils. And when they do that, they're reaching these kids who are in war-torn regions who don't get to go to school, and they're taking down the walls of the classroom. So these kids are still having class, they're just not in a classroom. And I think that that's present, but it's also our future. I think we'll have more digital classrooms, more teacher-centered applications, and a lot more virtual reality. Step 3 was the process, the design process and the practical application. So I went through the design process. The first step was to define my problem, and I actually made a problem statement because that's what I make my kids do. So I chose to state it like this. As I researched computer applications in education, I was particularly struck by the lack of applications that made the teacher experience better in the classroom. Many computer applications take extra time in planning or even training and then benefit the students. Based on this idea, I decided that I wanted to address this lack of teacher applications by creating one. I also know that teachers often struggle with timely feedback, so this is where I came up with the kind of application I wanted to create. I personally struggle with getting kids their grades quickly for presentations and projects, so I'm going to attempt to solve this problem and make my and my cohorts' lives a little simpler. After I defined my problem, I went back to my research to collect information. And of course, in my paper, I found that in this future trends section, I quoted an article that spoke of teacher-focused apps being part of the future, since there aren't that many. I collected rubrics from some of my coworkers and drew knowledge from my 2 years of teaching experience to begin to flesh out my idea. I began to brainstorm and analyze my ideas. I came up with 2. The first idea was a simpler app, and the second one was more detailed with sharing options and a more social component. The first app, the implications of that app, they would be able, teachers would be able to create rubrics within the app. They wouldn't be able to share them as much, and so it wasn't as complete as I wanted. The second one, teachers would be able to share apps. They would be able to have a social, like a professional learning network that they could develop. They would be able to create apps or choose from a bank of apps from their peers. It was just a more detailed idea. I'm glad that the design process is iterative, because I had to come back to this and decide that I couldn't do the more detailed idea because I didn't have the programming knowledge, and so I went back to a mixture between idea 1, which was simpler, and idea 2, which was more detailed. In step 4, I developed and built my solution on Buildfire, and it took me several weeks. Then I provided my idea to my husband, who has design experience, and a couple teachers, and also shared my full idea with them. And although there were a couple of suggestions for improvement, it was things that I couldn't do because of my knowledge limitations. But that's why we have the design process, because now I know I need more information, so I can go back to step 2, find more information on programming, and finish out the process again. That's why it's iterative. Part 4 is the product. I am attaching my presentation so that you guys can click on this link right here where it says click here and view my application on your computer or your phone, so you can see it working. This is the home screen that I have here. I designed the graphic at the top, created the plugins, and changed the icon images. I created the About Rapid rubric page, created the cover image, and wrote just a company bio. In the rubric selection plugin, I designed cover images, I formatted the rubrics, I added plugins, and I embedded forms. When I started this process, I did not know what plugins were. I didn't know any of the computer jargon as far as programming, so it was really interesting. If you click on one of the plugins in the rubric selection tool, you'll come to a Google form. It looks like the image on your screen right here. So this is a rubric in action. It's an embedded Google form. You fill in boxes at the bottom and it sends your response directly to the teacher so they can just simply tabulate the grade and put it in the grade book. So it's not as in depth as I would have wanted, but again, that's why we have the design process, so we can do it again and again until we get the product that we want. And then I made a rubric share space. So I added a social wall plugin, and I created posts explaining the purpose of this so teachers could get on here and share their ideas for rubrics, or they could share a link to a rubric and then I could add it to the app. So a few reflections, changes, and lessons learned. Again, like I said, I liked to use the design process and see it in action and actually have the feelings that my kids have. You know, when you have just an open book and the world at your fingertips and you can solve any problem you want to, and there are no constraints. You have to really break it down, and it was a little overwhelming at first and exciting, but now I know that feeling, and so I can share that with my children. I want to repeat that I'm glad the design process is iterative. Like I said, I had this really elaborate idea with a lot of sharing applications and being able to create things in the app, and just this beautiful idea, which I'm still going to pursue, but I don't have the HTML or the Java programming skills that I would need to do such an in-depth app. I did contact the people at the website I used at Buildfire, and they said there wasn't a plugin for what I needed. So eventually, maybe my app will be what I want it to be. I'm still going to work on it. So I'm glad that the design process is iterative, meaning that I could redesign, because I had to switch from my idea 2 to idea 1, which was the simpler idea. But, you know, I still had that social wall in there, which was part of my idea 2. So it's kind of a mixture, and my application took on a life of its own as I went through. So I was glad I was able to redesign. And like I've mentioned a couple times, this was just a very informative process. I could see things from my students' perspective, and just see what it was like to go through this process, and I like it, and I enjoyed it. It's nice to have a process. I see the value of giving students this base process for solving any problems and how they could use it in their entire lives if they wanted to. So I hope that as a society, as a school system, we start to implement this design process as much as we can, so that students just have a way to solve problems. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the information on my depth of content project, and I appreciate you listening.